Our next speaker is Larry Wittner, who's a professor of history at the State University of New York at Albany, and he's going to be speaking to us about democracy in the workplace, and he's given you a handout as well. And one of the Solidarity Singers.
Democracy is usually thought of in connection with the long struggle for popular control of government, political democracy. But there's also been a long struggle for popular control of the economy, what we might call economic democracy. Today, I'd like to focus on one facet of the campaign for economic democracy, the demand for workplace democracy. During the 18th and early 19th centuries, as American citizens began to move off the farms and to find employment elsewhere, craft workers enjoyed relatively good lives. They controlled their own workplaces and utilized an apprenticeship system to bring new workers into their own craft system. Ultimately, though, the development of a large, profit-driven commercial market began to undermine this craft system. Increasingly, craft workers were either driven to adopt exploitative practices or to take jobs as semi-skilled or unskilled laborers themselves. In desperation, the cobblers and the hatters, the carpenters and the iron molders began to form unions to defend their way of life. By the late 19th and early 20th century, they had largely lost that battle. Their numbers had been reduced, and the cutting edge of labor struggle had passed on to the workers in the new mass production industries. During the early 20th century, the industrial workers of the world led the way among mass production workers in demanding not only shorter hours and higher wages, but a new industrial order in which the economic decision-making would be transferred from the capitalist bosses to the workers themselves. Although the IWW was destroyed by a combination of corporate and governmental assault, the rise of the CIO, the Congress of Industrial Organizations, in the mid-1930s revived the demand for workers' control. In July 1936, as the CIO's organizing drive surged forward, John L. Lewis, the Labor Federation's leader, thundered, quote, "Let him who will, be he economic tyrant or sordid mercenary, pit his strength against the mighty upsurge of human sentiment in the hearts of 30 million industrial workers who clamor for the establishment of industrial democracy." Eventually, through unionization, many of them won collective bargaining rights and some degree of control over their working conditions. But what does this story have to do with college faculty? I'd suggest that college faculty are undergoing much the same shift in status as those craft workers. Let me explain. Faculty in medieval times had a tremendous power over their workplaces. They governed their educational institutions and thus had some semblance of workplace democracy. But this situation changed in the United States, where administrators and boards of trustees, usually composed of wealthy businessmen, assumed supreme power. For a time, faculty contented themselves with their relatively privileged positions compared to other workers, with their professional status, and with their medieval caps, gowns, and ceremonies. But gradually, faculty began to recognize that they really didn't have much power at all. As colleges and universities were run more and more like businesses, administrators and trustees increasingly viewed faculty members as little more than labor cost. And if faculty became too expensive or got out of line, they could easily be dismissed. One famous case was that of the well-known economist Edward Ross. In 1900, he lost his job at Stanford University when Mrs. Leland Stanford objected to his critical views on railroad monopolies. Faculty dismissals became much more common during World War I, when administrators and boards of trustees at colleges and universities around the country fired faculty whom they deemed insufficiently patriotic. Disgusted by the firings at Columbia University, Charles Beard, probably the nation's most famous historian, resigned his Columbia professorship in protest. In a scathing letter to the university's president, Beard wrote that Columbia was controlled by trustees who had, as he said, no standing in the world of education and who are reactionary and visionless in politics. Recognizing their deteriorating status and power, faculty began to organize. In 1915, the philosophers John Dewey and Arthur Lovejoy established the American Association of University Professors, the AAUP, to defend academic freedom and shared governance of colleges and universities. But this was only the beginning. In 1916, activists founded the American Federation of Teachers, a labor union that would represent the economic, social, and professional interests of teachers. John Dewey received AFT card number 1. Also, the AFT adopted one of his statements as his official slogan, quote, "Democracy in education and education for democracy." Other prominent intellectuals joined the new union's ranks as well, including Albert Einstein. Job security, of course, was a key demand of both the AAUP and the AFT, and it soon emerged in the form of tenure, henceforth the most closely guarded prerogative of the professoriate. Thus, today, the situation on campuses is a mixed bag. There is some measure of faculty governance through faculty senates and comparable committees. There is also some degree of faculty governance through unions. The AFT, the American Federation of Teachers alone, has 1.4 million members, of whom hundreds of thousands are college teachers. The AAUP is smaller than the AFT, but like its competitor, now serves as a faculty union and negotiates contracts. A third union representing faculty today is the National Education